Welcome to Buildings on Fire's Taking It to the Streets FDIC edition, coming to you live from the inner workings of the Indianapolis Convention Center and FDIC. I'm your host, Christopher Naum. Joining me today as an esteemed group of colleagues, close brothers here, talking about some pertinent items here that are all relevant to our theme of our program, talking about the built environment and construction related issues. Joining me on this episode of the FDIC edition is Assistant Chief Douglas Cline from Horry County, South Carolina, and Division Chief of Training Mike Richardson from St. Matthews Fire Department in Kentucky. So welcome, guys. Certainly a pleasure to, number one, having us present here face to face after certainly a very long haul over the last 16 to 18 months. Many of us have talked and collaborated virtually, online, and through podcasting. Many of our listeners out there, again, should be very familiar with some of our archived podcasts and our webinars and such over certainly the last 12 months. So, guys, certainly welcome and thanks for taking some time here. On this edition of our FDIC program, we're just going to take a few moments to talk about a continuing theme and trend that is pervasive, not only in the classroom settings here at FDIC. FDIC kicked off earlier this week with the live hot programs as well as the workshop programs. And then today, things kicked off in the main programs with Chief Bobby Halton giving certainly inspirational, as expected,
absolutely,
sermon, I guess, for better words. I think you could call it that, and certainly setting the pace for everything going forward. But certainly over the last couple of days with our programs as such, both some of our other colleagues that are presenting, the discussion continues to trend regarding some of the issues of strategy and tactics and operations, which ultimately all surround themselves and deal with building construction. And many of you are familiar when we talk about building construction, it's certainly as fundamental to structural firefighting as water is to fire suppression. And really the other thing, guys, is when we talk about our built environment, the complexity and the evolving risks that are associated with the evolving built environment today certainly are placing a tremendous degree of stressors on our strategy and tactics, our methodologies, and the need for change. It's certainly not our fire service from back in the 80s and 90s, of which all of us are part of that. Quickly, I ran some numbers here for just when we talked about back in the day. When we talk about some of the issues affecting this built environment, and especially when we get into our discussion here about strategy, tactics, and building construction, Doug, you've got 41 years in the fire service, Mike 36, and Mike 45, and that places us well over 120 years of elapsed time regarding our collective elements. But being involved in the fire service back in the 80s and in the 90s, we certainly did things differently than we should be doing or that we are doing today. Now, there are some departments out there that are, I think, still stuck back in the 70s and the 80s. And they're still operating with a notion and a concept and such, and a level of risk that, hey, the things aren't going to happen. Buildings are still going to allow us time to operate within them, and that's certainly not the case. So all three of us have been very actively involved in a variety of different degrees in not only training, but in the study and the research of buildings, building construction, and continue to evolve various elements. Doug's been involved in research. Mike, you've been involved in the thermal imaging aspect, the tactical portion of it, and I think that gives us an opportunity to talk about some elements here for our audience. So our theme here on our live program is really just talking about what are some of the emerging challenges. Had the opportunity to do our pre-conference workshop yesterday on the Fire Officer's Guide to Today's Buildings on Fire, in which we, again, just in a very short period of time, talked about construction and operational issues and really integrated that theme, which sometimes is very siloed out. We talk about buildings and construction, we talk about tactics, we talk about command, we talked about other elements. And then now we've got research that's creeped in and I think has sort of planted itself with both feet over the last 10 years, certainly. And now we're talking about the evolving issues of fire dynamics. So I'll start with Mike. I'll just ask you again, from the technology standpoint. So technology wise, in terms of equipment and methodologies and the aspect of tactics, what's been going on? Just sort of in a synopsis, where have we come from 20 years prior? So we've got the period before the 2000s and then the last 20 years, but there's certainly dynamics of that era in the 80s and 90s. And then we take a look at distinctive issues that were presenting themselves to us slightly in 2000, and now here 21 year later. So that
Sure.
40-year gap for us, and we've witnessed it firsthand, is it should make our heads spin around in terms of where we continue to go
Sure.
and such. So give us a little bit of your take on that.
Sure, and thanks, Chris, very much for the opportunity. And the key here is, if we look at that time span and looked at how much has changed in the world around us, it is astronomical. We were just having a discussion in computer technology, how much things have changed, and that everything is changing. The buildings are changing, our equipment, our gear is changing, everything's changing, and it should be for the better. But if we don't take full advantage of it, if we don't work on knowledge, skill, and ability, then we're not there. And thermal imaging was not around until the mid 90s. So we were having to evaluate buildings without that piece of technology. We have it now, but the ultimate question is, do we recognize its capabilities and its limitations? And are we trying to use it to its fullest potential? And I hate to say it, based on research, there was a survey that was just done in 2020. And right now, an average firefighter doesn't know that NFPA has a thermal imaging training standards. An average firefighter is getting at best 1 to 2 hours of training. Probably 40% of them are getting no training. So we've provided a tool to the fire service that honestly is not being used to its fullest potential. And in some cases, once again, based on research, has actually shown it's dangerous. Firefighters have misinterpreted temperature measurement images, and actually we're now making bad decisions based on bad information. So that's our challenge. Everything around us is changing. Can we keep up with it? Can we prepare ourselves, and can we take advantage of the things that we have? Or are we still stuck in a time warp and we're not doing the things we need to do? Because as you said, nothing in this environment is to our advantage. All lightweight construction, engineered construction, we see it on a daily basis, and we have to prepare for that.
It's a great point. You know, we have challenges regarding, we have either challenges or limitations regarding our ability to effectively read a building and sizing up. So, you know, for many of our listeners, and we've talked about size up, and size up has always been relatively consistent. It was born out of the workings and learnings of Chief Lloyd Lehman back in the late 40s and early 50s, and really started becoming institutionalized in the late 50s to early 60s. So size up has been around. And actually, sort of a tidbit of trivia, it wasn't until Emanuel Fried's textbook in 1972 on firefighting tactics that the true measure of size up was first comprehensively developed and then further institutionalized within the fire service, and many of our other colleagues, John Norman in particular, expanded upon that with some of our acronyms and such. But so we have difficulty in reading the building, and now we have challenges where we have equipment and tools that can immediately be available, and we know the gaps, and the gaps, as you mentioned, are significant in terms of the utilization and being able to apply it intelligently to aid us in operations. So now we talk about some tools, we talk about the building and the environment, which leads us to Chief Cline's involvement in the research side. So all of us have talked about various elements, and we're very astute to those particular pieces. But Doug, you had an opportunity to work directly under Underwriters Laboratory through ISFSI on some research related elements. And the other piece of this thing, again, technology in terms of thermal imaging, the building relative to the environment of the compartment. And the other piece here, and what we're talking about is what? It's the fire. It's the fire conditions in that compartment. So Doug, what can you give us some insights on in terms of your take of both involvement with research and sort of seeing where we've come in that time frame? Where are we going? What are some of the challenges regarding the emerging aspects of research and its application from a command or tactical standpoint?
Well, I think we go back and we talk about the research that Lloyd Lehman did, and it follows back to him doing a stellar presentation at FDIC down in Memphis, and talking about the tiny drops of water and the application of a fog stream into a compartmentalized area. And that was research. He actually was doing research in that time period. And we look at what's been done here recently. And when I say recently, we're actually jumping back almost 20 years now, when you go back to all the studies that began happening out in Phoenix when they did the thermal imaging, and they did, firefighter gear testing and weights on the roofs. And we fast forward that to the NIST and the UL studies when we looked at, what's the fire dynamics doing? What's happening inside of here? What's water stream application doing? all these type of things. What's the energy that's affecting the firefighter? And, we talk about the research. And one of the things that I think that we've learned out of this, or that we need to be learning, is that there's so much more that we don't know. And what we don't know that we don't know is killing us. And it's just like the thermal imaging. And, I equate this to like how we do building construction and fire behavior in firefighter 1 classes. At best, you're probably going to get 4 to 8 hours of that. And that's your enemy. That's your battleground that you should be studying. And that's what the research is really doing at this point in time, is it's giving us information that we need to be digesting in a very analytical, critical way to say, how does this apply to what we have in our jurisdictions? How does this apply to our operations? How does it, impact our operating guidelines? And I don't think that's going on. And in fact, I think some of the opposite is still occurring. And this is, both of you guys know this. People say, oh, that's just, that's not the way it really is. And, honestly, you cannot tell energy from a thermal imaging camera. What you're getting is temperature, not energy. And there's a difference between temperature and energy. And that's one of the things the research showed us that most people are not even comprehending. And the best way to describe this is a microwave concept. The temperature in that microwave does not get super hot. You can open the microwave, you can stick your hand right in there and pull it out. And I use a bag of popcorn for this. I'm the guy that loves popcorn. I go back to where you had to shake it on the stove, and you had to use, if you're really good, the Jiffy Pop popcorn, you were somebody. And then they had the air popcorn machines and the oils, but now you got microwave popcorn. Well, when the first microwaves came out, they were like 250, 500 watt microwaves, and it took forever to fix popcorn. You can fix it better. Now, I've got a microwave at the house. I get my popcorn out, I throw it up in there, and it says, popcorn. And then you have to select the size of the bag, but don't leave, because basically in about a minute and 20, minute and 30 seconds, if you don't pull the microwave to a stop, you're going to burn, your popcorn. Well, it's not about temperature. It's about the energy in the microwaves. And that's part of what, the UL studies and all this is talking about, that is a farther concept than what we've been dealing with. How much energy are you having to talk about? The books say BTUs, where we're talking about megawatts of energy. But the camera, which is not even being used to give us good graphics, to show us temperatures, to be able to indicate locations of fire or travel or flow paths, we're not even using that, much less the, some of this, I guess, research information we should be. And to me, that's a little disheartening, but it's also, it's a challenge to our listeners. You need to be looking at this stuff. You need to be studying this. You need to be very engaged in what's going on and the information that's still going on in research with UL and NIST and fire attack and strategies in our buildings, because that's an integrated component. And exactly what you said, building construction dictates a lot of what fire behavior and fire dynamics is going to do.
Well, when we talk about the building and the compartments, and this is part of our class, Mike was in our workshop session. We talked about the relationship of the building, the envelope, the rooms and their configurations, all have a variety of different orientations and sizings and such, and they all influence much of what occurs regarding fire behavior and fire dynamics. So one of the things that our modeling for many, many years now has always referred to is that aspect of the building, the aspect of the compartment, and then the human performance side, personnel. And the point I'm making here when connecting those 3 dots is exactly what we're trying to connotate here. We can talk about equipment and literacy, understanding the knowledge, training, skill set levels. So you may have some building knowledge, you may have some knowledge of firefighting strategy tactics for that compartment fire, but you may be lacking significantly, almost being illiterate regarding the application of the equipment, an understanding of vent path, flow paths, heat release rates. I mean, so we add these other pieces to it, and suddenly, we may have known the ABCs, in first grade, but we're talking about, maybe high school, in terms of its connotation, high school level knowledge that is well beyond the ABCs. And that's the challenge I think we have, and especially as instructors and trainers, we see a degree of illiteracy, certainly on a national level. So, and we have to temper that. There's a lot of great things occurring nationally, a lot of great departments, a lot of great academies, training officers, curriculums, and such. but there is, based upon all of our collective travels and opportunities to speak on a national arena, to see things not only at a convention level, but even on a more smaller regional or state level, there is a degree of illiteracy or the lack of knowledge for a variety of reasons. And I think if someone was able to identify what all of those true reasons are, we could help recreate the world in the fire service, but we don't. There's just a lot of working pieces. All of us have either current or have served in the past as representatives of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. I myself, I was speaking to a couple of our colleagues there that are on the board. This is my 41st year as being a member of that association or society, I should say. And that set me in the right direction in terms of influence and just understanding the criticality of information exchanges. So back in the day, I just had become a lieutenant. And a couple of months later, I'm going to a state conference in our home state. And I met at that time the late Mary McCormick, who was a part of the inner workings of the organization. And she convinced me without much duress to join and seeing the merits. And that was a time where Instagrams were being mailed out and all this information and different conferences were occurring. And actually at that time, FDIC was directly associated with ISFSI back in the day. So the point I'm making too is that there are opportunities to seek out additional resources to gain insights. So for those of you that are listening and you've heard about some of the different pieces, you may not have read or taken the computer-based training modules from UL, or you may have either the ability to have information promoted or information that's siloed out and sometimes suppressed in your department. So if you have insights or questions on these particular items, again, there's a wealth of information, not only on the fire engineering website and the various pages and links that are available through that organization, through the fire engineering portion of it, but also, again, as the collaborative organization to FDIC with ISFSI. There's such a wealth of immediately available information. Mike, you can speak to some of the things that are occurring right now that, again, although we're sort of digressing here, it's important because it's training. And whether you talk about learning building construction, whether you talk about fire dynamics and learning about UL related items, or just getting the bits and pieces that come about through various training documentation that the society has been involved with research, has been involved in developing a number of critical training programs and modules and electronically available devices and so on, that are all part of these learnings, how to take the research, how to take this knowledge and put it into our hands based upon the modern era. So Mike, just as a side note, you and I were chatting before we got onto the program here about an observation at the NFA, at the National Fire Academy.
Sure.
So we talk about how things have changed so dramatically. And part of our discussion, we were talking about being, what was it? What did you use the term about being the copy?
Carbon copy.
A carbon
Right.
copy. So
Sure.
even the terminology, carbon copy, and I think one of our last listeners was talking about the Rolodex. I mean, these are things that are not in the normal realm.
Slide
of
tray.
Slide tray. So
Right.
you made a comment about something that was observed at the NFA on a
Sure.
top shelter. So just make mention of that because we talk about how far we've come in terms of equipment and so forth. So
If you've ever been to National Fire Academy, you've probably been to O'Leary's, which is the store that's at one of the main buildings there where you can purchase things on campus. And if you walk in, if it's still there, right across from the cash register on the top shelf is the history of digital media. There's the original, are they 5 or 7 inch floppies, down to the 3.5 floppies, down to the zip disks, down to the thumb drives, and it's amazing because when I started, it was slide trays, overhead projectors. And it was very limited. It was difficult to transfer information. But if you look at nowadays, I can sit down on my phone or computer and I have access to hour on top of hour on top of hour of information on any topic or any subject I want. It's there, but we have to take advantage of it. And once again, that seems to be, and to your point, we can go to a fire and succeed, but the next fire we go to, is it going to be the same? Is the building construction going to change? Is the fire behavior going to change? Is something going to change? And if it does, do we have the knowledge, skill, and ability to pick up on that and change what we're doing? Or are we going to fight that fire just like we did the previous one? And there's going to be a severe consequence for that. So that is the keys we have to watch, that we can be successful in a number of the things we do. But when something changes, once again, do we have the capability to recognize that change is occurring? And then how do we respond to that?
Yeah.
Because once again, if not, we do the same thing over and over, normalization of deviance, and then we end up getting into trouble. And I'll give you a prime example. When I started in New York, we would set a training fire in the basement of a house. We could literally let it burn itself out and it would never break through the floor. If I did that in a house that's built today, it's going to be through the floor in 3 minutes. So do our strategy and tactics mirror that? Do we have the skill sets to pick up on that? And that's the question.
And I really think the answer is no, we don't. We are doing good and we're doing
Right.
well, but overall, when we take a look at what we've seen over the last 20 years in particular with our travels and types of engagements, overall, there is a degree of lackingness in terms of knowledge base, the skills, knowledge and abilities, proficiencies, literacy. I mean, we have the ability to sort of understand some of that, but not enough to be able to apply it. And that's part of that gap. We know a little bit to get by and sometimes cover ourselves with a lot of luck, but sometimes the other, that 10th domino suddenly fails and something very adverse and very significant or severe may occur. And we see that time and time again. Hopefully our listeners are reading and studying the NIOSH reports. It's not only the NIOSH reports, it's the AFC's near miss reporting system information. It's the information coming from other after action or severe accident reporting that are coming from departmental levels. There's so much wealth of information, guys, that you've got to, number one, be aware of it. And then secondly, you've got to find time to read it. In our class, again, we asked all the students to stand up and we went through a series of bulleted questions. And one of the questions, and we primarily said that sit down when you cannot respond in an affirmative. So if this did not apply to you, you had to sit down. And one of those bullets very early on was that you've read at least 4 or 6 NIOSH reports. And again, a very large majority of our audience ended up sitting down because they had not read those numbers. I mean, you can take 4 or 6 NIOSH reports and within an evening's readings, at least go through them, have a general understanding, look at the executive summary and take a look at the recommendations and have some knowledge base. But when further asking questions about particular, very pertinent events that have significant learnings on the topics we're talking about, many of those in our audience were silent. So it just goes back to that.
Firsthand knowledge is great when you can get it, but we don't get to pick and choose that.
Right.
But we can all control secondhand knowledge and gaining experience from other experiences. So
And I think you're hitting on something here that's very critical for our listeners to see. In developing people so that they can be effective and efficient in what they do, there's a skills aspect that is the training. The why behind the training is the education.
Mhm.
And that education, comes from the research, from the data, from that. But when you build that in there, there's also the experience component. With an experience component, you have that vicarious learning you're talking about that people were sitting down on. There is no better. I cannot, as somebody that does a lot of training, I cannot create every situation that you can run into. I cannot duplicate that. However, I can give you the skills to function. I can give you the education behind it, and then the experience that has to go with that. Sometimes it's vicarious, and it is the NIOSH reports. It's after action reports. It's reading these things, and I think that we have a gap there. I think that's a huge gap, and some of our folks may not be motivated to go get that, but that's self-development as well. That's a kind of a mirroring component, but that extra knowledge of experience of saying, hey, as Tom and those guys were talking, Tom Merrill was talking earlier about that Rolodex. Do you have something that you can regenerate, or the slide tray that you were talking about of technology? I can remember it was $2.50 to change a PowerPoint slide over to a regular disk to go into that. And then you had them spread out everywhere in your screen, and you would obviously knock it over and have to restart again. But we're missing some things. And Chris, I think this is conversations we had. This is what the society, being a past president of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, is they're trying to give you all that pieces put together with a variety of different people.
The resources there.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
the resources there.
tremendous.
So, and again, I think it's important. There's 2 elements here too, because we're connecting some dots here regarding that particular aspect. And I think in the analogy too, is that we're talking about rebooting ourselves. And there is a tremendous need to reboot. If we talk about the current terminologies that everyone understands, we've got to reboot ourselves, maybe sometimes clean that hard drive, reformat it, not to entirely get rid of everything, but reformat it to start comprehending, understanding, utilizing critical thinking on the fire ground a little bit more, conservative bias, and being a little bit more conservative in the aggressiveness that we try to posture ourselves with. But again, we can get into terminologies and semantics and so forth, but you just need to know and have the capabilities to do your job in the most efficient and time compressing manner, which is part of what aggressiveness may be. But at the same time, there's a finesse to that level of aggressiveness with knowledge. So again, I would encourage our listeners to take advantage of ISFSI in particular, take advantage of much of the resources and the wealth of information that's available online, especially with the podcasting, the archive podcastings through fireengineering.com specifically. I mean, so again, building construction. And one of the things I almost was reluctant to talk about here is that we just recently rolled out a 4-part summer series on the fireengineering.com podcast, talking about brick and joist construction, primarily type 3 construction. And we have 2 episodes that we've rolled out, both of which both of you have participated in. We have at least 2 more that'll be coming up through the course of the summer. And I think it might sort of fall into the fall timeframe, but take advantage of that. Another clear point in terms of historical precedents is just recently on August 2nd was the anniversary of the significant fire that occurred in Brooklyn, New York on August 2nd of 1978. Now it's termed or referred to as the Wall Bombs fire, in which 6 firefighters of FDNY lost their lives as a result of a timbered roof collapse in a commercial building. It was a supermarket fire that occurred. We had the opportunity to record Chief Vinnie Dunn on the 40th anniversary of that. That's available as an archived download. We've actually gone online through social media. Many of you should be following FDIC activities, hashtag FDNY, FDIC 2021. And some of our postings, one of the things that we're doing that has taken ourselves out of the classroom, put us into the streets, is that we're taking some photographs and doing some very liberal videography and such, talking about reading buildings and so forth. And we made reference back to the lessons and learnings out of that particular event. So I would encourage our listeners to download those, as well as many other programs. We did some row housing, we did mega mansions, we did some stuff just on building construction, the ABCs of building construction, and on and on and on. So it's not only our program, it's also Doug's program that Chief Cline facilitates. Talk a little bit about some of your programming.
Part of what we've done is Chris and I have collaborated quite a bit from the Buildings on Fire series, taking it to the streets, over to fire and training. It's a perfect match, because honestly, we're trying to accomplish the same thing. You know, every show I talk about, we're trying to get the best information and knowledge to our folks in the street. We're out there, you know, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, and, you know, taking care of business. And those are the folks that need to know this. And that's a big focus. And we've got a couple of the series that jump from, you know, either one of our programs, so that we're getting more time to talk about these things, which are critical. I mean, we're talking about things that mean the difference between life and death of firefighters, success stories and rescues and operations and things.
One of the, actually just brought to mind one of our programs on your that you hosted. We talked extensively about a topic dealing with tactical windows and benchmarking in part.
Absolutely.
Which really led into sort of, I think, a groundbreaking level of conversation about pre-incident response and how that might be more of a considered element regarding from time of dispatch versus much of what we talked about from time of arrival. But again, it was conversation that lends itself to additional critical thinking, and more importantly, application. How can I apply that relative to my world, your department, your region of the country that works? So there's a variation of things that can happen or not happen.
And Mike even said this just a few minutes ago when he talked about burning, you know, for a long period of time in the basement of a place. Now it's 3-5 minutes and it's done. And you know, one of the things Billy Dillon, a chief in South Carolina, brought this up with the concept. This was one of those topics that was in a conversation at the South Carolina Firefighters Association, that where it came out.
In the
at their
classroom,
conference.
as a matter of fact.
In the
So,
classroom, very, very dynamic, unplugged conversation that triggered some responses that we needed to talk about this, because,
Correct.
if you're a rural department, and there's a lot of rural departments that, you may have a 5 to 10 minute turnout time, and then you may have a 5 to who knows how many minute response time.
Right.
Well, how long was it burning before it got, toned out and through that? So what's your tactical windows? And everybody has this concept, and I've done a little bit of research with this and polling some folks and talking to people. And, how do you make decisions on tactical benchmarking? How long do you stay in the building? Well, generally it's about 10 minutes after we've been on scene, or 15 minutes or 20 minutes.
That was our
Oh,
class
yeah.
the other day.
Yeah. And then again, it's like, okay, what happened to this time period that you're not accounting for? And that's that education piece that we're talking about here, about building construction and the criticality of that, with the vintage, the area, the types of materials used. I just can't say enough about some of that thought process. That's a higher level of thinking, to a command process, to an operational tactical process. And everybody says, oh, well, that's you chief stuff. No, this is firefighter company level materials, and especially the company officers, which is the main cog in the wheel that make everything run on fire scenes. This is them, not, we should be thinking it, but they need to be thinking it. And have we done a bad job of teaching them? Well, maybe, I don't know. But, when you're polling people and they're telling you one thing and you're thinking, well, what about this over here? It's a little scary.
I think now more than ever, we have such a tremendous opportunity in terms of the availability of information, almost to the point of information overload. Versus back in our day, there was a challenge in getting timely information. It was normally coming through the mail, or you're waiting for the magazine to show up. We were waiting to go to a conference at some point during an annual cycle to, collaborate and get some insights on the leading issues. The relevancy or the availability, I should say, not always the relevancy or the accuracy of information, is available to us. We can sometimes see as an incident is actually unfolding relative to streaming video coming in, or audio and so forth, as well as opinions and information and data. As soon as something gets published, we have it immediately available, or have it accessible and available should we have the insight to get it. But part of that challenge is also filtering and interpreting that information. So it's one thing to have some awareness of any of the topics or elements that we've talked about. The other part of that is to have a level of understanding. That's where many of you should be reaching out to your training academies, your training officers, your chief officers, your company officers. So whatever rank you're at, go up above and sometimes go backwards. Sometimes it's that firefighter who may have some knowledge and skill set level and literacy to explain something to you. So don't feel intimidated on whatever direction you may go, or reach out beyond your department. Don't feel siloed out. Reach out well beyond the confines of your particular station, region, and so forth at the state, regional, state, or national level to certainly us, ISFSI, many of the other instructors that are part of the FDIC cadre, or anyone else that fits the need to gain that information. It's so critical for your continued learning and your continued awareness. I think now more than ever, we need to up our game plan, and it certainly starts at the personal level. So FDIC is all about training and challenging, networking and operations, and just getting insights, whether it be from the most basic to the largest or the more advanced levels. But you got to start somewhere. And I'll just ask for some closing comments here as we finish off our program. Mike, what do you think are some of the most pressing issues affecting the leverage of technology, the availability of information, and how does it relate to training, especially in your capacity position? What are a couple of key bullet takeaways here that our listeners can tie into relative to buildings, firefighting, and technology?
And we talked about it, and we used KSA, knowledge, skill, and ability, but we hit on a key one, which is also, don't forget the other A, which is attitude. We have to convince our people buy-in. Why do they want to know this stuff? Why do they need this stuff? And as Doug said, it's very important that we get to the whys, because too, if we get to the whys, that helps us filter through things to see that when something's said, Well, when I start getting into the why, does this work for me, for my organization, for my environment? So we have to get just beyond the surface, and we have to go to that extra level. And we can dig in that and get into that. And then just, we have to be willing and able to take full advantage of what's out there. And once again, you said, get outside of our small world or our small environment, because we can get comfortable, whether it's habits, whether it's patterns, whether it's rituals. We have to make sure that they're good habits. We can have good habits. We can also have bad habits. So we have to make sure that through our training programs that we're looking for those good habits. We're encouraging people. Once again, do we need to revamp how much time we spend on fire behavior, building construction? Because too, if we don't start with that at the beginning, why do we think all of a sudden it's going to
Right.
magically appear at the end? So if we, once again, if we don't have your buy-in, if you don't understand the importance and significance of why we need to know these things, because how many of us, let's be honest, in firefighter 1 and 2, memorized a bunch of stuff, took a test, and then it's gone. You don't use it,
Right.
you lose it, or if you don't understand
Absolutely.
the importance, you don't stick with it. So to me, those are all things that we have to strive at as either training officers, as leaders, and things we need to look at. And we have technology if we take advantage of it. But if we don't, it's not doing us any good. So
Doug, you're certainly heavily involved. As a matter of fact, your program here at FDIC dealing with professional development of the next generation of leaders. And although it's more specific to leadership, again, much of what we talk about here at the tactical and operational levels is all part of that leadership. So what are some of your key takeaways relative to our topic here on our program?
Well, I think one of the things that we really need to be doing is when we start focusing going forward in the next generation, Chris, is that there's a past generation that has a wealth of knowledge. And sometimes that's discredited. It's kind of written off, or they go out the door. And, right now we're seeing a large amount of folks in the fire service retiring out of the baby booming time period that's, taken 40 plus years and going out, or even more than that. But they have a lot of information that they need to be sharing. And this group over here needs to be tapping into that, plus learning all the other things that are changing so frequently. So when I talk about professional development, and I'll be doing this tomorrow afternoon at 3:30, it's about how do you develop people, and it's what do you put into the programs that they need to have. And one of the things I'm going to show is a matrices, and in there is a building construction class, a higher level building construction class that they need to be taking. There's stuff from the National Fire Academy, state programs have these. There's college curriculums, that take you through there. I know that Glenn Corbett's book is, he finished it out for the late great Frank Brannigan. And, those are the things that get in there, because there's a lot of stuff that people don't understand about that. But we need to do this. So as a focus from trainers or from training officers or people that are developing this next generation, is there's a lot of information that needs to be passed on and ingrained in them so that they have a true understanding, instead of just walking away and never sharing that. And, knowledge is power. It's a very strong, powerful tool, but only if you share it.
I think, in closing off, we talked about a number of elements here regarding the built environment. The built environment affects everything that we do when we talk about structural firefighting. It is all about buildings, the built environment, their age, their vintage, when they were built, their characteristics, and more importantly, their performance under fire. We talked a little bit about tools and resources. We talked about knowledge, capabilities, understanding how the equipment functions, and being able to apply it in an accurate manner that's useful and leverages the usefulness of technology for the betterment and the efficiency of fireground operations. It's the training and knowledge, again, developing individual and then collective skill set levels, knowledge, skills, and abilities at the individual level for each and every one of you, then certainly at the company, at the station, the division, battalion, and certainly at the departmental level. But it all starts with the individual. I challenge each and every one of you to seek out and identify your gaps of what you know currently, identify the gaps or the lack of information or knowledge that you might have, and then seek out numerous opportunities that you may choose to gain some further insights and knowledge and develop education that can be applied to your position, whether it be volunteer career, large or small, rural or metro, to increase proficiency and, more importantly, promote continued safety and well-being of our personnel. All of us have experienced directly and or indirectly line of duty deaths throughout our careers. And we've also seen and have had the ability to survive our near misses. We can certainly spend an entire program talking about near miss events and the lessons that we learned individually and how that shaped each and every one of us. So again, I encourage you to seek out more information, take a look at and listen in on our podcast, download those up. If there's anything any one of us can do, reach out to us through social media. And we're going to call it a day here at FDIC, although our day is continuing on. There's
Yes.
certainly a lot of excitement. The exhibit floor is getting ready to open up on Thursday, which will be tomorrow. There's a tremendous amount of opportunities and classes, again, coming about as a result of a very difficult period that all of us experienced over the last 12 to 18 months. FDIC is back and certainly right back where we need to be in terms of educating and promoting. And there's the brotherhood and the sisterhood. I mean, there's just so many different facets that all of us get recharged by here at FDIC. So for our listeners, I want to certainly thank you for tuning in. For my colleagues here, I want to thank you both for taking time out of your busy
Absolutely.
schedule here today.
Thanks for the
And we
opportunity.
look forward to our next program on buildings on fire, taking it to the streets. We'll be doing our program again live online on our next scheduled episode, which will be part 3 of our continuing series on brick and joist construction, type 3 construction. So until next time, thanks and stay safe.